definition, as we can see from the literature. However, we can say that identity is what defines an individual. It's not a unitary concept, it is complex. We all, of course, have multiple identities. None of us is simple. Myself, for instance, in one of my identities is, well, I'm a teacher. And in class, well, I do what teachers do. However, when I go home, I'm mum, I'm nana, I'm a different kind of person. And my kids talk to me, oh, mum, they say, in that tone of voice. Actually, to some extent, I'm a different person. And I'm sure everybody knows this kind of thing, that we're all the same. So our identity is complex. We all have multiple identities. Not only that, but it is situated and it moves from one location to another. Furthermore, it is dynamic. So we can't say necessarily that what we are today was the same as what we were 5 years ago. And it may not be the same as what we're going to be in 5 years' time, because our identity changes across time and space. As for autonomy, thank you, Joe. Yes, according to the classic definition, which of course is by RILAE, it is the ability to take charge of one's own learning. And I think that even though this is now quite an old definition, I think our modern concepts of autonomy are based on this one. However, although it's often thought to be something that people do on their own, it is not a solitary process. Benson, for instance, makes this point quite strongly. Autonomy includes the ability to cooperate with others in order to achieve a particular goal. I've lost the slides, Joe. It is complex also. It interacts with other factors. It is dynamic. It's subject to change. And it may also vary according to context. So if we have a closer look at the complexity side of it, as I've already said, it is complex. It varies according to a multitude of other factors, including age, gender, motivation, culture, style, personality, strategies, beliefs, affect, aptitude, and so on. Now, a study which might illustrate the complexity was one that I actually did myself in Turkey. It was intended to contribute to a book that I am currently working on with Adem Soruç, and which we hope to get published next year. I lost lost the screen again, Joe. I conducted it anyway among my participants in Turkey. Among both practicing teachers, there were 12 of those, and trainee teachers, there were 29 of those. I used a questionnaire, and which was designed to survey the relative importance ascribed to 11 different individual difference factors, but including autonomy. Now, on the next slide, I think, yes, indeed, we there is this is the table that I constructed after I had done this and got it together. And as we can see, the strongest one, the one that they all agreed with, the straight fives right across, 5 being the strongest agreement, is motivation. They all agreed that motivation was very important. Notice, however, that the practicing teachers, the PT, the ones down the middle, they gave 5s to positive beliefs, to affect, and also to autonomy. In other words, we might sort of infer from this that the practicing teachers are aware that they don't do the whole job, but the students themselves have to do some of the learning. Well, not just some, but a lot, and maybe even all of the learning. The TT, the trainee teachers, were more strong in their agreement about strategies. So, yeah, I then went on and did some analysis, which is on the next slide, and found that the difference, although the ratings of the practicing teachers and the trainee teachers for autonomy was not the same, one was 5, one was 4. However, the difference was actually not significant. But there were actually no significant correlations between autonomy and actually any of the other individual factors, except for affect, which the practicing teachers rated more highly than the trainees. So I suppose I could say that overall there actually wasn't that much difference between the practicing teachers and the trainees, not statistically speaking. If we have a look at the issue of context, I've already mentioned that autonomy is situated, and a learner autonomous in one environment may or may not be motivated to exercise autonomy in another context. And a study which illustrates this was one that my student, in fact, Elif Gurergene, conducted. This was a study she used, looked at learners' perceptions of autonomy. She surveyed 42 learners. There were 14 males and 28 females. They were 17 to 18 years old. They were studying at a private language school in Istanbul in Turkey. And as you can see from the table on the next slide, yes, can't we? Thanks, Joe. Lovely. Okay. The strongest rating we can see in the right-hand column, 4.5. This went to the students said that they see the teacher as a facilitator. Now, this, I suppose we can say, is a sort of a classic autonomous response. Which is fine. I guess when I look at this table, and I have not managed to follow this up myself, but maybe someone else might. You see, an interesting thing is that actually the lowest ones, the lowest ratings, the 3s on the right-hand side, go to working after class, this number 4, and previewing before class. It sort of seems to me that these are a little bit kind of inconsistent, are they not? In other words, it almost seems that they can give the right answer about facilitation and that. But in actual fact, maybe what they actually do maybe doesn't quite match what they seem to want to project themselves as doing or whatever. I haven't had time or the opportunity to follow this up, but it seems to me there's an interesting little inconsistency in there, which somebody might like to follow up sometime. As for the statistical analyses that I did, 4 of those items correlated positively with the results. It was item 2, 4, 10, and 12. I realize this is on the previous slide now, but the number 2, which was the they were the positive, okay, positive correlations. I'm sorry, now I'm just reading back to my own notes. So the one that was the strongest was the one that was number 2, which was taking tests to find out their level of proficiency. That accounted for 27.04% of the variance, which is actually quite high. It's more than a quarter. So that one strategy, if we can call it that, accounted for a quarter of the variance. The remaining 3 significant items accounted for about 10%. And if we move on to the idea of dynamism, of the ability to change on the next slide, another student of mine explored this one, Lingjie Jiang, and she conducted this study there were 63 Chinese students, 57 females, 6 males. They were aged in the 20 to 30 age range. They were studying for an MA in the UK. And as we can see on the next slide, she used a questionnaire, which I don't have time or space to show you that. But anyway, the one I want to draw attention to tonight is the question, the open-ended question that she asked, among others, I might say, which was, did you find it easy or difficult to adapt to the learning environment in the UK? Please give reasons and examples. And on the next slide, there are some of the responses. So, and from these responses, we can see that for many of these students, adapting to the new learning environment was actually not easy. As they explained, in China, the teacher leads and persuades students to learn, and frequent tests are arranged to push students to remember and to use the knowledge that has already been taught in the classroom. However, in the UK, the responsibility for learning rests largely with the learners. So from this we can infer that the dynamic nature was not totally easy to cope with for these students. One of the female respondents wrote, "It is difficult because I need to study by myself instead of relying on the teacher's help. It's hard." However, faced with such situations, students with good attitude usually rise to the challenge and find their own ways to deal with it. A female student wrote, "I think the learning environment is nice," she said. "It provides us enough space and resource to study on our own." So from these responses, we can see that although they may find it hard, students do manage to rise to the challenge and change existing ways of thinking. And I perhaps would just like to say that although, of course, these students happen to be Chinese, I actually myself suspect that it isn't true only of Chinese students. I have known many students, of course, over the years, and I'm not sure that it maybe isn't true of other groups of students as well, which is a possibility that others might like to follow up. So what are the implications of all this for the teaching and learning? The studies described here, they support the idea that autonomy is not a simple, unvarying concept which remains fixed across time and context. On the contrary, it is complex, it is situated, it is dynamic. And all of the pieces of the puzzle come together to contribute to a learner's sense of identity. It is necessary for the multiple pieces of the puzzle to be fitted together carefully and with patience and understanding, like my lovely colourful apple on the right, which I rather like. Okay. So on the next slide, I've just made a few suggestions for further research for those who might be interested. All of these studies that I've talked about could be replicated. They could use different methods, and longitudinal ones, for instance, would be a very good idea. Use different participants, different ages, different genders, and so on. Different contexts, such as national context, institutional context, different combinations of individual differences, such as personality and motivation, and so on. Now, I've just listed a very few references at the bottom of the slide. And I think finally at the end, the last slide, I would like to thank you for your interest, thank you for your company, and if you would like any further details or anything, my email is here, and also my website. And so, yes, thank you very much again for your interest.